getting into a religion that makes you sell magazines at the John Talon Metro at 6 a.m. on a winter morning. It's called Hooray, Hallelujah. I was looking for salvation and you were looking out the window. Today you didn't even say hello. Should I send a text message, or like a prayer, a test message? We see each other every morning, me in a hurry, you standing there with your pamphlets and your papers. We might not agree on much, but I admire your faith to be standing here each winter morning, facing a world that doesn't want to talk or even to argue. This one's called New Westminster, which is a small city south of Vancouver, and there was a history project, 150 years of New Westminster, a few years ago, and I sent a poem on the history of New Westminster, and they actually put it in the City Hall next to the picture of the New Westminster Bruins hockey team that is mentioned in this poem. Memory interrupted by daylight, by an easy history check. I thought I had watched the New Westminster Bruins win the Memorial Cup with Mike, my best friend, while we were living in Maple Ridge. Just changed the name from Haney. But they didn't win the cup until a year later when I was living back in Ontario and Mike had already moved to Chilliwack, where I visited him before we moved. Therefore I think now we must have watched the 1975 final. But I am positive, I took swimming lessons at the New Westminster Canada Games pool, because my mother has pictures. This is called Airport Fiction. Human tidal wave and 7 a.m. office meet, 6 p.m. coin-operated machine wash, telephone pocket ring, text, half-language type-in, no more haberdashery, but a handheld telegraph. Though I can't find any tunes, I am writing songs for those who still believe in laughter, a test-tube baby in the upright freezer downstairs. I will have a soulmate, an 8-track 10-speed, the only revolution, CD mountain bikes, the only revolutions. Airport Fiction, all the way to work, the paperback was on my knee, scrap metal automotive, scrap paper motive, even in the quietest moments. Sid Barrett apparently listened to Revolver constantly. I've got sound effects in the Book of Common Prayer. I am confused by the touchscreen in the rooftop garden. Change can be good, change can be difficult. We flooded the seaway, and now we take it for granted. It's a summer night, a Sunday. We drive home from the country. I can smell the woods, the dust, the cool air. Perhaps briefly the smell of a skunk. My friend is driving, I am sunburned and hungover, and tomorrow school will start. Everyone in this car is close. Two have become lovers. In 5 years we will not be close. In 5 years we will not even know where the others are. No one has a halo, no one has an excuse, no one is to blame. We are broken from the womb of school, music, and ideology. Perhaps later we will have cameo appearances in each other's lives, guest stars. And this is called Response to Cohen, and it's from the book that Jack put together for Leonard Cohen's 75th birthday a few years back, 2009. Yeah. I saw Arendt's Eichmann in Jerusalem on a shelf a few weeks back, and it reminded me of Cohen's poem, All There Is to Know About Adolf Eichmann. A simple poem of 13 lines about the banality of evil, how ordinary Eichmann was. It is true, if you saw him on the bus, you would assume he was just another commuter. Everything about him was average. Eichmann blended in, as Karasek did years later, in plain sight, living a life ordinary. But as Cohen asked, what did you expect? Talons? Oversized incisors? Green bile? Madness? We know, and we didn't know. And then the last one I'd like to read is called Back in Those Days, and it was written out. It was actually written almost this weekend, a year ago. And it's about the passing of Gary Carter, and it's going to actually be included in a history project on the history of Jarry Park. He was the, of course, famous Expos catcher. Back in those days, years seemed to last forever. Back in those days, we didn't measure time. Back in those days, there were no years, only seasons of hockey, baseball, soccer. As far as we saw, there was no last year for a player, only last season and stats. Back in those days, we chose our teams by their symbol, or perhaps the first game we attended, or perhaps the team our dads liked. A favorite team could be a family inheritance. Back in those days, your grandparents were lucky to be in Florida for spring training, a curious thing called the Grapefruit League. Back in those days, there was no Googling for stats. We collected cards for all we needed to know. Then we tried to take those cards by playing topsies, throwing them against a wall. It had its rules. Back in those days, I had hat head because the only time I took off my Expos cap was for the school picture. Back in those days, you felt anxious if you didn't get your favorite player's number when the sweaters were handed out. Back in those days, we didn't know some people didn't like the Big O. Back in those days, you played for hours with a tennis ball and a souvenir bat. Back in those days, garage doors were the universal boards and backstop. Back in those days, you learned how to imitate the cheer of a crowd with your voice. Back in those days, we wanted it to last forever, and we still do. Thank you.